Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all well. This is where I talk about the books that I'm reading, and I like to read diverse books and I highlight Canadian literature. If you are new, thanks so much for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. Today I am going to be talking about all of the books that I finished in August. I finished 9 books, which is way more than I thought, actually. 2 of those books were for the Tuesdays with Toni project, the reading project that I'm doing with AJ from AJ Dunn Reads and Writes. I read 2 of the books from the Beloved trilogy. I read Jazz and Paradise by Toni Morrison. And I talk about both of these books in their own videos, so I will leave those linked below if you want to go and check that out. That leaves 7 more books, and 2 of them were thrillers. I read The Chain by Adrian McKinty. This has been on my shelf for quite some time, and I'm so glad that I finally read it. This book starts off in a very powerful way, and it is very fast-paced. The story begins with Rachel dropping off her daughter at a bus stop to go to school. So it's like any normal day. The story then follows Kylie, the daughter, as she is taken from the bus stop by 2 people. And I thought that this was written really well. You know, you are concerned for her, but also the way that the kidnappers are written is really interesting. Then the story goes back to Rachel, who receives a phone call saying that she is now part of the chain. And in order to get her daughter back, she is going to have to kidnap another child, get the ransom, and only if she does these things and follows all of the rules will she get Kylie back. So the premise is very compelling. It really makes you think about how you would handle this situation, because the chain makes regular people do things that they would never normally even think of doing. But like, what would you do to save your child? So the first half, or I'd say even the 2/3 of the book, it was a page turner for me. But near the end, I wasn't as interested. It kind of lost its oomph along the way, and the end wasn't very exciting to me. That being said, this was a good book, and I would definitely read more by Adrian McKinty. The next thriller I read was The Bone Collector by Jeffrey Deaver. I read this as a buddy read with Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. We had some really good discussions about this book. Alice reads a lot of crime and mystery novels, so I really loved reading this with her. And like The Chain, this book also starts off as a page turner, and there are some pretty gruesome scenes. If you have seen the movie with Denzel Washington, it does follow it very closely. Although when I was reading it, I would not have pictured Denzel as Lincoln Rhyme. And I know it was also a TV show, but I never really got into it, so I can't compare it to that. I really liked that this was not your average crime book. It had some other serious topics in it as well. Lincoln Rhyme, who was at one time New York's #1 detective, is now a quadriplegic, and he is pretty angry at the world, but he is still a detective at heart. So when he is asked to help with this case, he can't resist. And Amelia Sachs is a rookie and also has a mind for detective work, and the 2 of them, Lincoln and Amelia, they work the case together, and each of their pasts is revealed over time while they're solving the case. And I really liked how they developed as characters and how their relationship was developed as well. I thought the ending and how everything came together was very clever. I think both Alice and I really enjoyed this book, but it's interesting that we both kind of said we weren't compelled to go out and read the next book, at least not right away. So if you have continued with this series, please let me know your thoughts. Like, is this a series that I should continue with? because right now I just kind of feel like I got the story and I'm good, but I could be wrong. Maybe there's something I'm missing. So thanks again to Alice for reading this with me. The next book I also read as a buddy read, and it's a historical fiction book called The Book of Night Women by Marlon James. I read this with Gemma from Gem of Books, and it is one of 2 books that I gave 5 stars to this month. The writing and the language of the book takes a little bit to get used to because of the dialect, but eventually I found that it was like easier to follow. There was really no problem after a little bit, and it totally worked. The story takes place in the 18th century on a plantation in Jamaica. And this is a slave story. It's a coming of age story, and it's a we're taking back our lives and you can go bleep yourself story. The characters in this are so real. The story for me was about the characters. It revolved around Lilith, a young girl who has a lot of spunk and gumption, which is both dangerous but also refreshing. Then there's Homer, who is a leader among the slaves, and I was mostly intrigued by her and finding out what her backstory was. All of the women in the story have almost like a darkness in them, and Homer is basically seeking revenge. The overseers and plantation owners also have a darkness in them. Most obviously in how they treat the slaves. And I found it really hard to take in that they could be kind and tender at one point, and in the same sentence show cruelty and be so evil. And I thought that that was written so well. I really enjoyed this book, and Gemma and I talked about just a lot of things in this one. There are some really difficult scenes. I felt like I was right there, and it made me both feel for the characters, and it also put me off by them at the same time. The characters are just so complex, and in the end, although it would have been nice to have it all wrapped up with a little bow, a story like this can't really end like that and be realistic. So it ends the way it has to end, and you feel like you are right there as well. So I thought that this was a fantastic book, and I have his book, A Brief History of 7 Killings, sitting on my shelf, and now I really want to read it. It won like 1,000 awards, so I have high hopes for it. Thanks again to Gemma for reading this with me. Okay, the next 2 books I have are both nonfiction, and I read Finding the Mother Tree by Canadian author and scientist Suzanne Simard. I've talked about Suzanne Simard before, probably when she was a defender on Canada Reads. So Finding the Mother Tree is both a science or nature read, but it's also a memoir. So Suzanne Simard is one of the top ecologists in the world and is mostly known for her work in forest ecology. And the book brings us from her childhood, her upbringing, and where her love of nature and trees kind of took root, to the work that she did for her PhD and the significance of her work, and finding out the relationship of trees and how that impacts nature and us. So she talks about her parents, her siblings, her husband, her children, the end of her marriage, and where she is now, or at least when the book was written. I really like how she intertwined her personal life with the life of the trees and her scientific work. And I love trees, so I found it fascinating to learn about what she was doing. I am not a sciencey person, so I'm sure that some of the scientific stuff went way over my head, but I could still understand enough to really appreciate what Suzanne was trying to get across. The next book was my second 5-star read of the month, and it is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand. This is another book that has been on my shelf for way too long. This is one of those times where I did see the film first, so I knew what I was getting into here, and I knew that I needed to be in kind of the right headspace. So this is the true story of Louis Zamperini, and it is an incredible story. Many of you already know that I love a good survival story or redemption story, and this delivers on all accounts. Louis Zamperini was a runner, an Olympian, and then the Second World War kind of changed all of that. So Louis became an airman, and when his plane gets shot down, he is assumed dead. The fact that he survives almost 50 days at sea is beyond a miracle. Then he is interrogated, and he spends time in a few different POW camps. Again, there are scenes in this book that are very difficult to read, especially how Louis and others were treated by Mutsuhiro Watanabe, I think is how you say it. He was one of the Japanese officers who was vicious and brutal and unrelenting, especially when it came to Louis. The other prisoners all of the prisoners, I guess, called him the bird. And it is the bird that Louis still dreamt about when he left and when the war was over. And he somehow still had a hold on Louis's life. So Louis tried to live a normal life with his wife. And it was just this thing about the war that stayed over him like a dark cloud until he finds a way to forgive. So this is such an amazing story, and the author writes this so well. She also is the author of Seabiscuit, which I have yet to read, but I have seen the movie of that as well. And you can tell she did a lot of research for this, and I love that in the acknowledgements, she starts it by saying, it says that, I'll be an easier subject than Seabiscuit. This is Louis talking. And then he says, because I can talk. And I thought that was very telling of Louis's sense of humor. So I highly recommend this one. The final two books on my pile here are both Canadian authors. And I think I'm going to start with this one, and we'll start on a positive, or end on a positive note. Okay, I read Watching You Without Me by Lynn Coady, and I read this for like 3 reasons. Once, because we're getting super close to the Giller Prize, and Lynn Coady has won the Giller Prize in the past. This book was longlisted in 2020. I also read it for the Reading Across Canada Challenge because we are in Nova Scotia, and Lynn Coady is from Nova Scotia. The book takes place in Nova Scotia. And then I also read it because it was a book on my shelf, and I'm trying to read, more books from my shelf. So I had a lot of reasons to read this book. And I am so sad to say that me and this book did not get along. I was really disappointed by this one. Karen is the main character. She has been estranged sort of from her family for a while. Her mother has just died, and now she is going back to Nova Scotia to take care of her sister Kelly, who I don't think we ever really know exactly what Kelly has or what the deal is with her, but she has some developmental disabilities and she needs care. So their mother has been caring for Kelly and has helped set up for her throughout the week, including having Trevor take her for walks twice a week. So the setup for this started off pretty good. It kind of reminded me of Sally Hepworth's books in like how you get the family dynamics and then, something happens. But with this story, nothing ever really happens. So there's an attempt to create an ominous feeling, which is sort of there because I found myself questioning this Trevor guy the whole time. And then I thought it might be too obvious, so I thought there must be something else. But this was a thriller without the thrill, and a mystery without a real mystery. I didn't get this. It was so underwhelming. And it's really too bad because I think the potential was there. I may have to try her Giller winner and see how that goes. Okay, and then the final book on my list is a debut, and a book that I think has a strong chance to be longlisted in this year's Giller Prize. And it is Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. So this book has been getting some hype, and I think it's deserved. The story begins with a dream. Mackenzie has been having a lot of dreams ever since her sister died. Then the dreams start becoming reality, sort of, and Mackenzie and her family try to figure out, what the dreams are telling them and how they are connected to Mackenzie's sister. So the first thing that I loved about this book is the way the family is described and how the Cree culture is brought into the story. There are some very funny moments, especially if you understand some of the culture. So the way she describes bingo and the way they laugh is perfection. The way the folklore of the Weedigo is brought into the story as well is brilliant. I thought the writing was excellent. Grief is a huge theme in the book, and the way that Mackenzie and her family are grieving is still so raw, and it's written so well. So this is a horror story, and at first I thought, where is the horror? I wasn't really getting it. The dreams are one thing, but it wasn't enough at first that I would have maybe categorized it as horror. And then that all changes kind of drastically. There are some scenes that were very grotesque, and I can't get them out of my head. So it's a slow burn, but the horror is there. I thought this was a very strong debut novel, and I will definitely, read whatever Jessica Johns puts out next. So these are the books that I read in August. Please let me know if you have read any of these, or if any of these are of interest to you. Are they on your radar? Did you give any books 5 stars in August? I would love to hear all about it. I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.